Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather, and thanks for joining us again tonight right here. It's the 28th of August, and as always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information. I like to mention a lot, and just about every night, that you can call us on the Alaska Weather Information line, 1-800-472-0391. That's the easiest way to do that by phone, but if you like to use your phone as a data device, of course, weather.gov/Alaska is a good choice on a PC, but try mobile.weather.gov. It's a lot faster. It acts like a weather app, but it's from the National Weather Service, so you can take that and save that web page, mobile.weather.gov, to your home screen on your device, and it's low bandwidth, it loads quickly, and you can customize it to the locations that you are interested in. I love it. David.Snider@NOAA.gov is the easiest way to find me, and if you have any questions about anything that you find from the National Weather Service, whether it's tsunami related, river related, glacial dam release related, or even fire weather related, I'm happy to serve you any way I possibly can, and I'll get your information to you or help you find the right person to get it from anytime, any time of the week. Happy to do it. It's what I enjoy doing. Hazardous weather right now, yeah, we're talking about some cool weather around northern parts of Southeast, anywhere generally north of Sitka through the capital city up toward Haines and Skagway, out toward Gustavus, and then out around Yakutat. Temps could go down just below freezing there and create enough cold weather. You might have some frost on the plants there. So this time of the year, it's always a good idea that if you want to keep growing those things a little bit longer, you might want to bring them in or at least cover them up in a breathable fabric so that you're not smothering them with plastic, but giving them the option to keep that frost from forming on top of the plants and other sensitive plant material there that you might not want to have ice crystals growing on and piercing the flesh of all your very delicate plants out there. So keep the things growing just a little bit longer there. Winter's coming no matter what you do, but maybe you can sneak out a couple more weeks if you're careful with them tonight in northern parts of Southeast. A frost advisory issued for your area. Up north, it's a flood watch for the central and eastern Beaufort Seacoast, as well as the north-facing slopes of the eastern Brooks Range. And this is going to be for tonight into tomorrow and into Friday there, as high water on some of the area streams and rivers is expected there, or at least possible, because of precipitation that we've seen across the region in recent days, and more is on the way. So, flood watch posted for some of the eastern and central parts of the Brooks Range as we go into the next couple of days. In the meantime, we're still watching fire danger, of course, across South Central. We know smoke is still a problem. Generally speaking, the Copper River Valley, as well as parts of the Matanuska Valley, on up into the Susitna Valley, and down toward the western Kenai, including Anchorage, have at least high fire danger, and in some cases even extreme fire danger. That threat has not changed. And out across Southwest, we are still looking at least some pockets of high fire danger on either side of Lake Iliamna, just west of Chignik, and out toward the Bristol Bay region closer to Dillingham. Now, one thing that is changing is the weather. It does look like there is a developing chance now for more rain in more places across Southwest and South Central. Eventually, that could mean Southeast as well. As we're looking at the satellite image on this Wednesday, we are not looking at actual rain falling, but we are seeing weather systems that could certainly make that happen. And one of those is a broad area of low pressure that's forming out across the western and southern Bering Sea, as well as the North Pacific. We also have a low here across the southern Gulf, generally dry conditions across Southeast, South Central, and Southwest. Plenty of clouds across the interior. We have a boundary sitting right here across the Yukon Valley, and up north, cooler air is trying to push in. You can see that coming in from the north and west now toward Ukqiavik and Arctic Village. As we look at the infrared satellite picture, pardon the lines there at the beginning there of the loop, but you can see that westerly flow coming in across a large part of the northern sections of Alaska, and all of that is helping to pull in very warm and wet air across the region. As low pressure continues to gather here across southern parts of the Bering, it looks like as we get into Friday and Friday night that we're going to have an opportunity for a broad area of low pressure to work its way up into southwestern Alaska, Kodiak Island, maybe the southern tip of the Kenai Peninsula. And while that does offer some hope for wetter weather across South Central, it looks like an even bigger push of that moisture may make it further north as we get into maybe Saturday and Sunday, perhaps into early parts of next week. Now, if you're like me, you're looking at this going, didn't you guys say that last week and the week before that and maybe the week before that? And I will agree with you. Yes, it looked like those changes were coming. This is a slightly different pattern. It has a slightly different intensity, and climatologically speaking, or seasonably speaking, this is how this happens. And we're seeing a lot of those pieces come together here across the North Pacific. So for me, it looks like a much more reasonable chance or solid chance that our weather is going to change. And I think we're all ready for that, especially if you're in South Central or Southwest. I would assume in Southeast you're always ready for some more rain because it rains in Southeast, right? Yeah. High pressure sitting right now across western parts of Alaska, 1,025 millibars. Our squiggly line, of course, means smoke. Southeast, looking pretty clear and dry with high pressure all around you from the British Columbia side all the way down to the Gulf of Alaska side. We do have weak low pressure sitting out across the central Bering. This is not the system that I'm watching yet. That's a little bit further out to the west, but it's going to set the stage, and it is actually connected to part of that system that is just off our map right now. And here's some cold air up across the north. Not terribly cold, but it is cooler than what we have here across South Central, Southwest, and Southeast. And along that boundary today, we have seen some pockets of wet weather. Here we go. As we move into tonight, low pressure will start to push eastward into this holding ridge across the western parts of Alaska. With that, we get that southeasterly flow, bringing some light rain up towards St. Matthew, St. Paul, St. George, all the way down toward Unalaska. Could have a little bit of turbulence around this. We'll take a look at the turbulence map in just a minute, but due to this pattern here, that's where I would watch for some chop in the air if you're flying tomorrow. As we look at the Gulf, warm and wet air is lifting north and west. We've probably got some pockets of fog around the region. Might see some fog in parts of Southeast, but really the big picture is that cold air that's going to settle into northern parts of the Panhandle as we head into tonight and tomorrow. So again, that frost advisory in place. Watch for more smoke along the Kenai into the Susitna and the Anchorage areas tomorrow. Front lingers across the Brooks Range. Along that boundary, showers could be possible into Kotzebue Sound and maybe Shishmaref. Areas of fog across the North Slope, and this low pressure system is creeping eastward ever so slowly. High pressure is holding that back and giving us an east and southeasterly flow into that front. As we get into Friday, there it is, low pressure working its way across the central and eastern chain. Areas of light rainfall there. This could intensify into the weekend. Areas of light showers across parts of southwestern Alaska. And this system is just the leading edge of perhaps that new weather change. High pressure still has to get out of the way. I'd really like to see this a little bit further east and south to push this a little bit further north, but that's not where we are just yet. But that could happen. So again, this is a developing situation, but it does look like rain will be moving to the north and east, perhaps into the southern parts of the Kenai. Still dry in southeast, still dry in the interior of the North Slope for your Friday. Parts of the west looking at showers all the way through the YK Delta. A quick check of temperatures for Thursday morning. Lower 40s to mid 40s as you head further south. It does look like these temps across the northern parts of southeast run the risk of dropping into the 30s very easily. So keep an eye on that. It looks like it's going to be colder here. Mid to upper 40s for parts of the interior. Southwest, mid to upper 40s as well. Nearly 50 in Makoriak. 30s on the North Slope there, mid to upper 30s from Utqiagvik eastward. South Central, Southwest in the 40s, 52 in Kodiak. High temperatures for your Thursday afternoon. Still pretty mild across the interior. Lower to mid 60s there, 61 in Bethel, 67 for King Salmon. Southeast could see temps easily in the mid to upper 60s, maybe even 70 around Ketchikan and Annette. Lower 40s for the North Slope. And Aktuvik Pass, 46. Arctic Village, 47 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
As far as aviation weather goes, our concerns will mainly be out in the west for turbulence and lowered visibility and sealing as low pressure gathers out in the west and builds a little bit more energy. We'll have a healthy south flow throughout the next several days, all as that is gradually creeping eastward. We'll start out with IFR in the Gulf, certainly across most of the Aleutian chain, all the way from the Pribilofs up to St. Matthew, and then nosing in on St. Lawrence Island. Also across the Brooks Range and the Arctic coast, you're going to be looking at IFR. A lot of this will be due to upslope conditions, so you'll probably see, at least initially, a lot more MVFR across some of our northern areas and around the Seward Peninsula and Nome, Kotzebue Sound, and also starting to creep into the western sections of the Gulf and around Kodiak Island. You can see that's the case by the afternoon. Still widespread MVFR across northwestern Alaska, areas of IFR across the Arctic, and then really most of our concentrated areas of IFR will be around the eastern Aleutians up toward Cold Bay and False Pass especially, and west towards Shemya. And around the Gulf, really not a whole lot of concern for coastal areas themselves, just out over open water. Look for hit and miss marginal conditions to wane away around southeast and areas around south central, with most of Kodiak Island taking the brunt of that, as well as the Alaska Peninsula. By Friday morning, IFR across the North Slope. Now, this will be on the windward side, or the northern side, I would say, of the Brooks Range. Most of the Brooks Range, the Arctic coast, still looking at MVFR. IFR around the Pribilofs, St. Matthew, all the way out across the western half of the Aleutians, and then nosing back in toward the northern coastal areas, the Bering Sea coast of the Alaska Peninsula, and perhaps Cold Bay and Falls Pass on the south side. And then IFR across most of the Gulf, also leaning in toward Kodiak Island. Southeast, south central, most of southwest, and really most of the interior by Friday morning, looking at a VFR start. And that actually improves as we get into the afternoon on Friday, with marginal conditions across the North Slope, generally from Wainwright southwest and really into the Seward Peninsula. Things should be VFR. Most of the interior, the Yukon Valley, south central, Copper River Valley, and southeast, all looking pretty good. IFR is still lurking out here across the Gulf. That will probably take over Kodiak Island at some point, all the way down toward Chignik, and then west towards St. Matthew and the western chain. IFR conditions continue into the afternoon. Now, as far as your pass conditions go, Anaktuvuk and Adigan Pass at least start close to IFR. Maybe not all the way, but it's going to be very high MVFR, or perhaps all the way MVFR toward the afternoon. Things do improve no matter what. But it could be an IFR start there. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, marginal conditions to start the day probably hold, and then from there on out, really everything looks pretty good. Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, maybe marginal in the morning, and then some improvements during the day. Same goes for Isabel Pass, Mentasta Pass. We're going to call marginal at this point. And then Teneda Pass, all the way toward Portage Pass, VFR in the afternoon, and Chilkoot and White Pass look A-OK at this point. Things look pretty good. Freezing levels there in the morning. Surface freezing line is very close to the Beaufort Seacoast in the eastern end, and then quickly jumps up to about 6,000 feet as you get into the Yukon Valley and just south of Arctic Village to Fort Yukon itself. And then still holding onto a lot of warm air. We've got kind of a flat ridge is what we call it right now, where we certainly have high pressure in command, but we don't have any huge dips or rises in that weather pattern. So what you've got is a temperature structure that's kind of spread out here across south central and into southeast. Levels there 8 to 10,000 feet. You can see a little bit more packing here across the central and western chain. That's due to low pressure starting to creep into the region. And with that comes a little bit of icing potential. Isolated moderate is still really high up there, but we're going to start to see some changes, I think, probably across the north in the next couple days. But out here across the west, these levels should only go up at least through the end of the week as low pressure is moving in. We'll keep our eyes out here across the Kamchatka Peninsula and the western Bering Sea as we get into late parts of the weekend into the early weekend for signs of colder air trying to sneak in on the backside. Under the jet stream, you can see low pressure sitting here across the Bering. We'd be watching for that colder air to come in here. The main pathway, the superhighway of weather, is out across the North Pacific, taking a little jog south around low pressure here in the southern Gulf, North Pacific, and then working into the Pacific Northwest. This is where most of the active weather is going. This is the cold air up across the north coming into the North Slope, and here most of us are across no man's land. Really not a whole lot happening here. A pretty decent inflow though across southeastern Alaska at 60 knots. You can see underneath that a little bit of a low pressure system, but high pressure is pretty much in control with that south and easterly flow coming into western Alaska. Westerlies moving off of the interior into Canada, and westerlies coming through the Aleutian chain anywhere from 15 to 25 knots. Similar pattern at 3,000 feet. High pressure firmly in command here across the northern Gulf. Southeasterlies into western Alaska, 20 to 25. Light winds across the west and the Brooks Range in the interior, 10 knots there. And low pressure across the eastern Bering with westerlies moving over most of the Aleutian chain. That's where most of our turbulence will be. Watch for considerable moderate across places like Unalaska, Dutch Harbor, and Akutan below 5,000 feet.
Leatherbacks are the largest turtles on Earth, growing up to 7 feet long and weighing more than 2,000 pounds. These sea turtles are among the most highly migratory animals on Earth, some traveling up to 10,000 miles a year between their nesting and feeding grounds. Prevalent in every ocean except the Arctic and Antarctic, the species overall is declining, more so in the Pacific. In the eastern Pacific, the Mexican population was once thought to be the largest in the world and has experienced an alarming decline.
This trajectory of decline that we've seen and actually collapse. We're talking about only 20 or 30 turtles nesting every year, where thousands used to just 40 years ago. That's the kind of dramatic decline.
The western Pacific population has been declining steadily, and it's particularly critical to act now before it collapses, while there are enough turtles and nests to respond to conservation measures. But threats to all leatherbacks in the Pacific need to be addressed.
The top threats to populations are uncontrolled coastal development, all the bad stuff on the nesting beaches, egg harvest, poaching of the females, predation on the eggs by dogs and pigs. Deforestation makes the sand too warm and dry and the eggs don't hatch. Another one is incidental capture in fishing gear. During their vast migrations, they get caught in fishing gear throughout the Pacific. And finally, marine debris, which the leatherbacks mistake for their favorite food, jellyfish, and they choke on those.
Protecting leatherbacks in U.S. waters alone is not enough to ensure the continued existence of the species. The highly migratory nature of Pacific leatherbacks requires cooperation and international collaboration. NOAA is focusing on partnerships with Mexico, Central America, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and the Solomon Islands in the Pacific.
Our action plan promotes a holistic recovery strategy that addresses all the sources of mortality. So that's basically ensuring that the remaining nesting sites are protected and the nests produce as many hatchlings as possible. And then secondly, in tandem with that, is reducing the fisheries-related mortalities. We're working with international partners to incentivize community participation on the nesting beach conservation and developing alternative livelihood programs that wean communities off leatherback resources and introduce alternative methods for food and income. Recovery is going to take a long time, on the order of 20 to 30 years at least, before we see some of these actions bear fruit. But here in the US, we can all help leatherbacks by making seafood choices, for instance, that support sustainable fishing practices. And beachgoers can certainly do their part by keeping our oceans clean of plastic debris, picking up marine litter, particularly plastic bags.
Together with our partners, we are strengthening protection and conservation efforts to ensure a future for leatherbacks, helping them to survive and once again thrive in the waters of the Pacific Ocean.
For over 40 years, NOAA scientists have been collecting data and piecing together the story of the gray whale. Each year, new discoveries are made, revealing the secrets of this ancient traveler. With the northeastern Pacific population recovered, leading scientists from the NOAA Southwest Fisheries Science Center continue their research efforts to help save the western population from extinction. The most effective way to identify individuals and count the population is to photograph them from the surface. Using the gray whale's distinctive markings and gray spots caused by parasites on their skin, scientists document these characteristics to identify individuals.
So we're able to track migratory pathways and corridors by the simple use of photo identification. There are other ways to do that as well, biopsy sampling and genetics.
And from the air.
Aerial photography is one way you can study animals based on their size and shape. So you can learn a lot about nutritive and reproductive condition of whales just by measuring their size and shape from vertical aerial photographs.
You can also put satellite transmitters on them and track them remotely. You put the transmitter on and let them go, and you watch them move across the Pacific or down to China or wherever it might be.
To further learn and discover where these great sojourners swim, the team of researchers traveled to Russia and set up camp on Sakhalin Island.
The main focus of our research while we were on Sakhalin was to collect photo identification. If it was a whale that we had not collected a genetic sample from previously, we would also attempt to collect a sample from the whales.
Whereas whales are endowed with natural insulation, their human observers must gear up to brave the cold in order to study these marine giants up close.
We're typically only able to work about 1/3 of the time that we're there, and that's mostly due to this fog that just invades the area and sits sometimes for weeks on end. So it can be very challenging to try and do field work in this site.
Recently, 2 whales from the western population surprised scientists by migrating across the Pacific to the waters of California and Mexico.
It's a really fun finding. It's added another piece to the puzzle that we didn't previously know about. And I would have to say that it's opened up more questions than we had before.
Research scientists from Japan, Russia, and the United States share images of animals they've spotted.
We take a photograph of an individual off of Sakhalin Island, and we get a phone call from Japanese scientists, and they say, hey, guess what? We've got a picture of a gray whale in Japan. We say, can you send it to us? We'd love to try and match it. They'll send us the picture, we'll compare it to our catalog, and we'll say, hey, we've got a match from Sakhalin to Japan.
Unlike many species of whales that still remain on the endangered species list, the eastern Pacific gray whale, once on the brink of extinction, now numbers about 20,000 individuals. Recovery efforts that started 40 years ago and the ongoing research and monitoring by NOAA scientists have contributed to the conservation of the gray whales. Together, with legal protection and public education, scientists are playing their part to ensure the survival of this magnificent migratory animal.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
And back with the sea ice update for you on this 28th of August. You can see that the nearest pack ice to AKwx is about 350 nautical miles to the north and east and about 250 nautical miles north of Kaktovik. Not a whole lot of change in the last several days. There are a lot of open water, but we are getting to the time of the year where we start to see some changes there, and the battle goes on between northward moving storms and colder temperatures that can quickly freeze over large amounts of water in a short amount of time. We're not seeing that yet, but soon. You know it has to come, so we'll keep watching on that for you. In the meantime, for southeast, light winds from the North Canal, 10 knots and 2-foot seas there. Northerlies in Clarence Strait, a little bit more of a northwesterly flow through Stevens Passage, and north and northwesterlies coming down the outer coast tomorrow. This after a cold start. Remember, frost advisories are posted for the northern half of southeast up toward Yakutat as well as we start out your morning there for temperatures. It could be a little bit on the nippy side. For your Friday, not a whole lot of change there. Northerlies continue south of Sitka down toward the Dixon entrance, 10 to 15 knots with a 4-foot sea. Southeasterlies develop inside of Clarence Strait. Again, not a whole lot of wind to talk about. 2-foot seas there, light winds across the inside. Generally 2-foot seas there. Northwesterlies, 15 knots, 4-foot seas on the outside for your Friday. In Prince William Sound, a westerly wind, 10 knots and 2-foot seas. Light winds coming in from the west across the Kenai Fjords and into the Barren Islands. You see a little bit more of a southeasterly response there, and south winds coming up Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 there. Generally 3-foot seas on the inside and down to 2 feet for most areas on Friday with a light westerly flow. The westerly wind continues into the northern Gulf. A southeasterly wind, though, still bending into low pressure much further out to the west. That's coming across the Barrens at 20 knots with a 2 to 3-foot sea on Friday. And you can see the effect of the wind is a little bit stronger here across southwest and Bristol Bay, all responding to a larger area of low pressure out across the Bering. 15 to 25 in general, about 3 to 5-foot seas there, maybe 6-foot seas south of Sand Point, and an east and northeasterly flow on either side of Kodiak Island with 15 knots and 3 to 4-foot seas there on Thursday. And those winds come up even more on Friday. Northeasterlies at 25 with 4-foot seas, 5-foot seas east of Kodiak Island, and easterlies as you head down toward Chignik. More of a west and southwesterly flow as you move up through the Alaska Peninsula. 15 knots there with a 4 to 7-foot sea. Inside of Bristol Bay, 3-foot seas continue with that 15-knot wind from the south and east. For the chain, a broad westerly flow. Here's your trough, still west of the Pribilofs as we look at Thursday. Southerly winds out ahead of that, 30 to 35 knots with 8 to 9-foot seas there. That westerly flow sweeps in about 6 to 7-foot seas, 8-foot seas north of Nikolsky, or 6-foot seas, I should say. Again, 20 to 25 at its strongest. And as that trough lifts north and east, we get a little bit more of that response from the south and west across the eastern chain Friday. 15 knots there, 5 to 6-foot seas to the west, a southerly flow through the central chain, and then we get our northerlies back across Kiska to Shemya, 20 knots and 5-foot seas on Friday. For the west coast, southeasterlies coming in 20 to 25, a little bit of a stronger flow closer to the trough. You can see that right here with that wind shift. anywhere from 9 to maybe 10-foot seas around St. Paul and St. George with a 30-knot wind. Very light winds and small seas inside of Norton Sound. That picks up a little bit more on Friday. The offshore flow picks up for St. Lawrence Island too, and north of Nunivak Island and Macquarie. Southerlies coming into Eatolen Strait. St. Paul and St. George, a little bit more of a southwesterly flow, 20 knots and 7-foot seas. One thing we're going to watch is that flow coming in that's kind of a longer duration southwesterly flow. If that's the case, that could start to set up a concern, not a for sure thing, but a concern, something to watch for some coastal flooding as we get in toward the weekend. So keep watch on that. North and northwesterlies across the Beaufort Seacoast. Northeasterlies coming down through the Chukchi, 10 to 20 knots, in fact, 2 to 4 foot seas there on Thursday. For Friday, more of an offshore flow. That strengthens up to 20 knots, 4 foot seas for you. Light winds and small seas across the Beaufort. A little bit of an onshore push, but not much. 5 to 10 foot seas, 1 to 2 foot seas, 5 to 10 knot winds. That's much better for your Friday across the Beaufort Seacoast. Recapping tonight's weather, we've got a stalled boundary across the north. This could set up an opportunity for some heavier precipitation, especially as we head toward the latter parts of the week. This is the case. It has been very wet up there already, and a flood watch has been posted in case of some rising rivers in the region. Again, that's a possibility with this weather pattern right now. Low pressure across the Bering at 1,007 millibars, drives in a south and southeasterly flow, and warm and wet air is massing here across the southern Bering. But everywhere else is under the control of high pressure. That means we'll start off tomorrow with a frost advisory for northern parts of southeast where temperatures could dip just below freezing. Remember to cover up your plants or bring them in. If you do cover them up, don't use plastic, use a breathable material, and that'll help save them, maybe give them another week or two as we head toward fall very quickly. Low pressure in the west is creeping in on the periphery of this high pressure system, and it's going to move very slowly, but it does offer us a chance of precipitation across southwest and maybe south central by the end of the week.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.